So the title of my presentation is The Ouroboros and the Mongoose, the dead ends of theory and theory fiction. I've divided it into two parts, the dead end of theory and the dead end of theory fiction. I have 10 minutes. I'll try and wrap up five of my topics in 2 minutes each. So I'm going to examine the effects of the reterritorialization of Deluzo-Guattarian thought by accelerationists, posthumanists, and postcolonial theory. I'm going to attempt to extricate the revolutionary core of DNG from their reactionary appropriation by the aforementioned. My core argument is that the absent conception of the conjunction of capital and labor flows inside the work of Deleuze and Guattari has led to a superfluity of positions which are neo-reactionary to their core but want to claim to be revolutionary. I'm going to emphasize the processes by which theory fiction is generated and disseminated and how it does the discourse more harm than good. So I'm going to start by examining posthumanism, and then I'm going to go on to accelerationism. The accelerationist turn rightwards that goes to techno-fatalism, and the post-humanist advocacy for a minoritarianism inside institutions as a micro-political form of resistance in ontological pacifism, exhaustion, and like the theory fiction productions that come out of these two like core thoughts uh, that have like descended on us from cybernetic fiction and the CCRU. So let's start with post-humanism, human redux, or the failures of re-engineering. The problems that arise from trying to extricate the rational from the binds of its animalistic, metaphysical, and animal form um, arise from the normative constraints of the rational. And in order to critique this ontological hierarchy that has been set up by Descartes and Kant, initially privileging cognition, and then by critiquing Hegel and Marx, who have set up the socio-historical, we end up into a position where we get the all-inclusive post-humanism that is then instituted and, more importantly, institutionalized. It is served up as a politically progressive alternative to its counterpart accelerationism. This results in a form of Baudrillardian hyperreality that can best be understood by examining the neoliberal capitalist goals and objectives of academia, and to some extent, para academia. Posthumanism and its associated deceleration is served up as a politically progressive alternative to Land and Co. and to the boomer fascists who have now found 4chan in the last 5 years. Their position effectively argues for a minoritarianism, but it is important to note that the institution has in its interest to engage in a Foucauldian form of resistance that is increasingly pessimistic about the possibilities of social and political change. And instead, it's happy with being ontologically pacifist, exhausted against capital, coming directly from Rosie Braidotti, uh, in some senses, the godmother of posthumanism and critical posthumanities. Now, the models of becoming that posthumanities then gives are limited inside the capitalist axiomatic, see itself as being a gear in the capitalist axiomatic, but being a greasy, squeaky gear. And I think the most damning indictment against critical posthumanities and Braidotti herself is that she anticipates this line of criticism, and her weak defense against is the following. Skeptics will see this as being concomitant with neoliberal, whereas it's intended to be the exact contrary defense, basically. Uh, in supplanting the supposedly exclusionary humanism of Marxism, in supplanting rationalism and the Enlightenment project, they institute a new exclusionism. That is, it can be seen in the idea of the missing people that they've inherited from Deleuze, subsuming the subaltern into a vacuity that is superficially radical, but effectively a position that fetishizes the disintegration of the proletariat. The value of the project of enlightenment is not limited to the action of world making. It is equally critical to the task of making the self. The image of a human carving themselves out of a stone block is concomitant with Prometheanism. Uh, so essentially, the idea of, as it's uh, coming from the father of my own country, the idea of see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil, is the main governing principle of the critics of of Prometheanism and of uh, rationalism and the Enlightenment project. So that was decelerationism. Let's jump to accelerationism. Capital as flow and capital as form. As I mentioned before, I think the main reason why these positions arise is because Deleuze and Guattari try to replace Marx's idea of capital and labor through a conjunction of flows in their description, but they don't root it into a social process necessarily. So they say that labor and capital can exist together as decoded flows, but there is no social relation there to account for the conjunction of these flows later on. So this foundational confusion essentially leads people into hypothesizing new theories and by extension theory fictions that are doomed to end up into the neo-fascist and neo-reactionary stage where they have already ended up. Now, Land has gone on to say economies are assembled, form flows, and surprisingly, their native codes are currencies or current signs. As societies mobilize matter, energy, resource streams, their monetary conventions, registered flows by inversion, and strict reciprocity, we can see Land's ideas about the constitution of the economy as a conjunction of codified flows is firmly rooted in an abstraction first introduced by Deleuze and Guattari. Land's revolutionary praxis of liquidating things into a cybernetic feedback loop of fallback positions where there is a deterritorialized fringe of schizopolitics that is coercing political capital into doing something. I think we've all seen how that has descended into the new neo-react, or rather the NEORACC, where ACC is the accelerationism. So the third pillar of this triumvirate is post-colonialism itself. Uh, in the 90s, when postmodernism was declining, I think a lot of post-colonial academics in India and the third world, and like a lot of these countries, Nigeria, found ways to gain good employment in Western universities. And because postmodernism was suffering from a crisis of being too white, too cishet, it had a place for these academics, and so a bargain was struck. For token representation, people essentially got a flux of academics who themselves are from privileged positions in their own countries. Academics sharing their ideas on the subaltern inside universities in the USA are upper class, upper caste Indians. Nigerians who are presenting post colonial theory in America are upper middle class or rich Nigerians who are completely either removed from the struggle or at least shouldn't be parsing out an understanding of their subaltern to the first world. So it's only fair that in order to supplant postmodernism, we've gotten at least 50 or 60 different kinds of postmodernisms. Metamodernism, neo-modernism, ultramodernism, renewalism, all of these things that claim to supplant the Eurocentrism of postmodernism but are still as Eurocentric. Now, this injection of post-colonialism inside postmodernism served to revitalize postmodernism, and the new revivalism of theory and theory fiction has been because of a similar injection of mysticism, Eastern petropolitics, and you know permeating consciousness inside theory fiction and inside theory. And I think we can trace a straight thread from CCRU to Negarastani and to the current influence of theory fiction. So now finally coming down to theory fiction, how it is abusive and how it's descending from these constructions of theory. I'm very sorry, I know I'm going over my time. I'll wrap it up quickly. So the Ouroboros is a snake that is eating its own tail. I think if you tell someone who's writing cybernetic fiction that their work reminds you of a Ouroboros, they'll maybe take it as a compliment. The same way postmodernists take self-reflexivity and self-referensive uh, critique as a compliment. But I think what we forget is if the snake's tail is inside its mouth, it's also shitting inside its own mouth eternally. So CCRU started this cultural legacy of theory fiction, and I think it was born out of this idea of people who couldn't code or weren't at least willing to code against the state, uh, to do something with their time in order to seem radical against the state. Um, it's people who did not have the stomach for joining an actual cult or at least doing some mystical cult rituals the way Asifel would do, uh, but wanted that radical identity all the same. And you can easily see this in the even in the cover art or in the design aesthetics of the CCRU logo. The black and green that is reminiscent of 1999 2000 Matrix movies. Anyone who's written even 5 lines of code in the last 10-15 years knows no integrated development environment looks like that, right? So it's an outdated idea. Inside the last 3-4 years with COVID, this new aestheticization of dark academia that has risen up, and the aestheticization of these particular aspects of creating theory, creating I'm losing the term, the hyper real. No, not the hyper real. Uh, I'm forgetting the term entirely, but Land coined this term for uh, fiction that becomes real, right? Hyperstition. Thank you, Moses. So this idea of hyperstition, what is hyperstition? Hyperstition is the idea of willing things into reality, almost in a religious, mytho-religious sense, right? But anyone who has, I think, a basic understanding of dialectical materialism, and not even dialectical materialism, but even common sense, can see that if NFTs exist, eventually there is going to be an NFT exhibition. Someone is going to get that bright idea. And writing a piece about NFT exhibitions and then rejoicing when one actually happens is not willing something into reality, right? So I think the self mythologization of CCRU and people who religiously at least follow CCRU is akin in the present day to the self mythologization of bad YouTube comedian podcasters. They're generating their own narrative as being something radical while they're the most boring thing in the world ever. So this contrarian edginess has this tendency to drift into the rightward discourse. And I think I can trace a direct thread uh, from Infinite Jest, from a lot of these big 1990s postmodern novels from the UK and the US that were written out of suburban boredom. So in the present day, theory fiction is a result either of first world suburban boredom or third world upper class, upper middle class ideas of wanting to be included. And then the bargain again is the same deal that was done in the 90s in postmodernism and postcolonialism. Let's diversify this. Let's talk about Durga, and think about how the war machine applies to Dalit politics, and then maybe we can beat the dead horse for 5 or 10 years more. Uh, it's punk rockers who can't play music. It's noise musicians who don't understand anything about harmony. And if you say you don't, they'll take that as a compliment. That yes, noise music isn't about any ideas of subverting harmony, but it's about the absence of having any ideas of harmony thereof. But people who say these things don't understand noise or music or harmony. Similarly, people who generate theory fiction as a radical or meaningful way of subverting theory or fiction don't are not using theory or fiction, either of them, correctly. They're basically doing both poorly together. So you can write good fiction, you can do good theory, but I don't think doing both is possible. And to be very honest, in some senses, theory is already removed from philosophy. I feel theory is an admission of a person that I cannot do good original new philosophy, so let me just do theory. In that senses, theory fiction is twice removed from reality. And Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And it is, um, it's very disappointing to see the joy on people's faces when they're doing something bad or mundane, and they look at you with a smile and say, look at the wonderful thing that I am doing. So I think that's about it. And I think there are like many more things I can go into: a critique of Fisher's flatline constructs and how that legacy has come down to us, a critique of integrative objects as it comes from non-philosophy philo-fiction. But like, I'm going to drop off because I have like gone over my time. Thank you.